I really haven't like shot the starter pistol for my novel yet, but I've been thinking through draft 0 and am planning on continuing to push that forward using our plot structure. And that's what I'm really excited about because, life gets in the way, and I just kind of went through the whole gamut of things that I'm up against, but there's still always time to do the plotting. And I have to tell you this, Tim, when I was in school and for many decades after that, I was petrified of plotting and I couldn't figure it out. It was like this cryptics, this code that I couldn't figure out. And even when I, quote unquote, studied other people's writing and tried to sort of divine the secrets of, the plot, it never made any sense to me. Never. And in doing this podcast, I feel like I finally have an understanding that I really am sheepish about. I should have known this 25 years ago. But plot is a byproduct of character and conflict. It is the combination of those, and literally plot is just writing down the sequence of events that happens. And I used to think that the plot would sort of drive the story, that the plot was the thing, and the people and the stuff that would happen inside of it was just sort of flavor. And no, not even close, right?
Yeah.
So I don't fear plotting as much as I used to. I still haven't done it successfully in a way that I can go, haha, I've conquered my fear of plotting, but I feel like I'm getting closer to it. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about today, was the how of doing that.
Yeah, let's dig into it, man. I'm into that.
Good. Well, do you want to kick us off? I have a whole thing that I can go into, but, I feel like I talk too much. So, where should we start?
It's so, I don't know if we can, maybe we should be advertising that way, because I don't think there's any other podcast where people are afraid they're talking too much. In shorter pieces, I love writing and finding out where it's going to go. I find out, stumbling on an ending. I'm not very concerned with plot at all, usually in shorter stories, because I think for me, actually, it's more about a moment that I'm describing. If it's a piece of microfiction, like let's say like a 1,000 words or less, if you want to call that micro or flash or whatever. And within that moment, of course, there should be plot. We should have some conflict. We should have some sort of resolution, perhaps. But I think I naturally gravitate more towards character and maybe like a little bit of a character sketch. Now I'm trying to think back on all the things that I've written. I have no idea. Maybe I'm probably thinking I'm doing that, but not. But
I mean, your stuff's really short, and so you get away with not having to plot out sequences of events, because it's almost like a character study or a study in style. And that's why they're so engaging and so interesting. But yeah, you kind of skirt the plot issue by having a very small footprint within which you don't need, exactly. My plan is revealed.
I don't have to worry about anything that we're talking about on this. Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Wait. Yeah, but for the longer pieces that I've written, I was the same way, I think, as you, where I was very concerned with, I have to have these certain things here. I have to have a plot. I have to have it outlined. I have to have the platform, the tilt, and a resolution. Those are the three things that we called it in narrative improv, where we have like the everyday thing, the problem that happens, and how we solve it. But now I'm realizing more, as I've written a couple pieces that are longer in length, that I love discovering the plot through the character's actions and thoughts and what they do in the pieces that I really enjoy end up causing the plot to move forward. And then of course, once they're on that track of whatever it is that they're trying to achieve, we throw a bunch of shit in their way to see how they can get through it. But yeah, I used to be a very the plot is separate. I write that on this piece of paper over here, and the character is different, and the character embodies these things, and they shall never meet. But now I'm like, no, I'm interested in the plot through the character. That's kind of what I really enjoy doing.
Yeah. I think about it this way, because the plot, is that sequence of events that occur. And if you read the plot of a story, the plot wouldn't be very interesting. It would really just be a travel log of who went where and spoke to whom and did what. But the story, and I really like to draw a distinction between plot and story. The story is about the emotions that are involved, the why of what happens, not just the what of what happens. So like if the plot is the what of what happens, the story is the why. And so I wouldn't want the plot to get in the way of the story. I don't see those as similar. I don't see those as equivalent.
Yeah.
But, not to put too fine a point on it, to me, all of this discussion around plot and story and whatnot is just to get to a point where you feel comfortable enough with it to tackle it. And like I was saying earlier, I have never, until very, very recently, like basically until last week, Tim, I have never felt comfortable attacking that part of story creation. My character work was always suspect back in the day. And then I stopped writing. And so as a result, I didn't have the opportunity to take character and put characters into conflict with each other because I never focused on character. I was focused more on language. So, okay, now I've started to build more interesting characters, and I definitely see an improvement in that aspect of my writing. Then we talked about conflict, and conflict is really about creating opportunities to have forces in opposition, creating opportunities for drama. Cool stuff can happen when you set up conflict. So, all right, cool. Well, now that I have characters, I can actually generate something interesting that might happen rather than try to prop up a story based on purely the purpleness of its prose. So, okay, great. I've got characters and I've got conflict, and now I come to plot and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with plot. And it occurred to me, that it was very simple, that character plus conflict equals a plot point. And the plot points, you literally just write down what happens, and it's okay. So the idea that we've got these characters who are going to do, and I know you and I differ on this, where I really want to imagine the characters as separate entities that make their own decisions, and you're like, yeah, but they're all in my head, so like that doesn't make sense. So I know we kind of disagree on that, but we're still very excited to allow the people that we've created to do their own kind of thing. That makes sense. So as they start to collide with each other and have these interesting things occur, we're just writing down what occurred. So it's more than that, though, right? Because if it was just a transcription of interesting events, it wouldn't be a plot. So like when you think about plot, what is it that you think of when you have the whole concept of a plot of, say, a novel?
What I say was the concept for an entire novel. I would think that it's just a character trying to accomplish a goal that changes their life status.
Yeah, the plot seems to be how those events build. And I've seen a lot of different structures that people want to follow. So you've got the Save the Cat, right? You've got Freytag's Pyramid, you've got Dan Harmon's Story Circle, Sid Field's 3-act structure for screenplay writing. You've got all these different formulas that you can use to create a plot that sort of creates a shape that is pleasing for the reader or the viewer. And so it's natural for someone who's an emerging or newly established writer to sort of go to those plot templates and seek shelter and comfort in them. And so I did. And as I was kind of reading through them, I'm like, I don't like any of these. And it's not because they're bad. They're not. They make a lot of sense. But I'm not connecting with any of them. I can't identify with it. It's almost like if I'm not originating the story, if I'm trying to like plug it into one of these templates that pre-exists, I feel like it's almost like a Mad Libs activity, where it's like insert noun here, insert character name here. You have a story. And it's like, I don't have an emotional connection to that story. So I went through an exercise, and I shared the notes with you, and that's what I wanted to talk with you about today.
Yeah.
Is the exercise of how do I chunk the information in such a way that it is manageable for me to kind of tackle it piece by piece. And it accomplishes creating a story that has a certain shape. Because you'll see that a lot. Vonnegut actually has this whole thing about the shape of a story.
Yeah, that's a fabulous video. Yes.
Yeah, we should. I'll try to remember to put the link to it in the notes because it's really good. But he has 2 different axes, and he tells a few different stories, just in overview, and kind of shows the shape of that story. And it's pretty compelling. I think that, and look, Dan Harmon's Story Circle is the shape of a circle. Like if you start thinking about stories in shape, where it's like, when you look at a character's position in the story, it's basically how much power they have over how much time the story has had. And again, it feels like math. I know I'm not trying to mathify everything, but I see things in curves. So like if you've got a character with a ton of power, the likelihood is that in a traditional Hollywood sort of blockbuster film, that character's power is going to be highest at the very beginning of the movie and then at the very end of the movie, right? And that basically they fall into this trough throughout the middle and into the climax, and then they kind of pull themselves up out of that trough, after the climax. So it's like as if I'm the main character, my ability to affect change sort of drops as I get further and further into trouble. And then at some point, I'm going to discover the way out of trouble. And then my power climbs as I execute that plan and get out of trouble in the third act. So that's kind of how I think of it as power over time.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yes, I like that thought of they have power at the beginning, at the end. I have a general gist of what my novel is working towards, that we're working on for this delightful second season of the Tiffany Writing Workshop. Subscribe. And so I'm just instantly starting to think about how my character will be powerful at the beginning, at the end, because at the very first I was thinking that my main character wouldn't have power, but Tim has to think about that. Tim will have to go think about that and report back at some point.
Yeah. Look, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that's the story you need to write or that's the only way to write story.
Oh,
no, not at all.
No. And of course I'm not taking it that way, but it's like, I don't want to be strict in writing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the way that I'm writing it now, I used to be anti-outline, and this one I'm like, I'm doing things so different. I'm writing an outline, but I also want to think of different approaches. And so I think that that's a very interesting idea. Maybe that's why it stuck out to me that the character has the most power at the beginning, at the end. So yeah, I'm going to go think about that. I've got lawn mowing to do today. So, I'm going to be listening to that new Blur record, and I'm going to be thinking about my novel.
That's amazing that you can write or think about writing at the same time that you listen to music. I can't do it. The music just takes over for me.
Well, the only way, one of my favorite things to do as an aside, and you were worried you were talking too much. As an aside, when I listen to, I apologize for being so algorithmically based, but when I'm writing and I put on the Discover New Music playlist on Spotify, I only know I really like it if all of a sudden I hear something through the ignoring of the music that really, like, I'll be writing, and then I'll be like, hey, wait a minute. That's a pretty interesting sound or a lyric or a tone or a singer or a guitar riff. That's how I know it's a song that I want to listen to more, is if it speaks to me through the process of my writing. So if Blur can work through the lawn mowing and thinking about writing, they've made a good new record.
Nice.
Now that I've totally derailed you.
No, not at all. It's a lot like when I would try to plot back in the day. I would stare at the page and go, I don't know what happens next. And like sometimes I try to trick myself into, well, just tell the story. Okay, so the guy and the girl get together, and then what? And I'm like, I don't know. All right, well, let's say they go for coffee, and then what do they say? Like, I don't know what they do. Mind, shut up. Like I couldn't figure it out. But I have a new structure now that I want to follow. And look, for everybody out there who's still there,
Mom,
right? And me, a month from now. The structure of these different plot templates is really compelling, and it's my problem, it's my damage that I can't sort of connect with them intellectually or emotionally and use them. I think they're really good tools, and whichever one of those, because they're all kind of similar. Some of them are better at telling certain types of stories, like the Sid Field 3-act structure seems to be really well suited to tell the Hollywood blockbuster style of movie. That's a tight 90 minutes, right? Or I guess it could even go 120, but like it's really good at telling that kind of story. You could plot Jaws or Raiders of the Lost Ark or any of those types of movies to it and kind of see that rising and falling action really, really clearly. And then Dan Harmon's Story Circle seems to be really good at telling stories that sort of arrive where they started, with a small change in character, right? And that's perfect for episodic television. So there you go. So it's like, pick the one that makes the most sense. But for me, I don't want to pick any of them because I need to really understand how the machine works before I'm willing to use the machine. So I deconstructed the machine. So if anybody's interested, we're going to go over that now. I basically broke it down into a 10-step process that, if you hear it, you're probably going to go, oh, well, that's just this one. I'm like, well, maybe it is. But like, this is the only way that I can begin this work, and I'm very happy to have it. So I kind of wanted to go over that with you, if that's okay.
Oh, please, by all means.
Okay. So one of the things that I noticed first was in looking at, it was that book called Creating Character Arcs. I think the last name of the writer is Weiland. But anyway, it's a really interesting book, and it takes a character-centric focus on building story. And I appreciate that. And one of the things that they call out is something called the normal world, and that's in quotes, or excuse me, that's in capital letters, capital N, capital W, the normal world. And it's this idea, and this isn't the only one that asserts this, but this is the one that stuck for me, is that at the beginning of a story, you have to paint the picture of what is the normal world, what's the ordinary world, what does it look like, so that you can then tilt it and have change and kind of know what it was before and then be able to see the effect of the change on the world. So I'm like, okay, well then the first thing you have to do in your plot structure is define the normal world, right? That's the counterpoint to change. That's the blank canvas that you're working from. And so a lot of the background, like all that work that Lucas did for Star Wars, he had notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of world descriptions and, drawings of sand people and all the stuff that, you can't just start from nothing. So he defined the normal world, that way and kind of set up the whole thing. So in a story, I was actually looking at this movie called Edge of Tomorrow. Do you remember that movie?
Ooh, Tom Cruise?
Yeah.
Emily Blunt?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it came out in 2014.
There are some movies that I feel like I wish I hadn't seen because I want to experience watching them for the first time again.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really good movie. I was surprised at how good it was because I went in going, oh, a sci-fi romp. How bad could it be? And by the end of it, I'm like, that was a damn good movie. So you feel the same way?
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's, yeah. But, I also have a very weird unaddressed crush on Tom Cruise for some reason. But yeah, it's a fantastic movie.
He's very skilled. He does certain things incredibly well. There's a reason he's so popular.
Yes.
So defining the normal world, I went back and watched the first 20 minutes of that movie very recently because I wanted to see, well, how did they set up the normal world? Because, again, if you haven't seen the movie, go watch it. I'm not going to do a plot summary, but it's an alien invasion, and Tom Cruise is a major in the U.S. Army who's sort of a PR guy, and he's trying to sell the war so that they can recruit more people so they can fight and repel the alien invasion. So in the first 4 or 5 minutes, they do a really expert job of setting up exactly what I said through cutting away from, news footage and political leaders and combat footage. And so they really tell a very clean story in about 4 minutes of the situation and how dire it is. And then, the fact that he's the sort of face of the army as far as recruitment goes is very well established. And then where it tilts is actually when the global force commander, the big head honcho, is worried that this particular invasion that they're about to launch, which is going to have a high body count, is going to look unfavorably on him from an historical standpoint. And so Tom Cruise assumes that he's talking about how to manage, image going forward. And so he kind of gives him some strategies. And the guy's like, no, I want you to go in embedded with troops, and I want you to film the attack to kind of shape the story. And Tom Cruise the character that Tom Cruise plays is a coward. And he is dead set against that, to the point where he actually tries to blackmail and I had forgotten all of this until I watched it again. Because the majority of the movie is about him in this time loop, but how he got into it. I'm like, yeah, I don't remember how he got into the damn time loop. And so, but this is how he got into it. And it happens really quickly. Like within the span of 10 minutes, they get all this exposition out and they put him into this hot water situation, and he's just in it for the rest of the movie. I'm like, damn, that was pretty good. But anyway, he basically tries to blackmail the, commander into saying, well, look, I'll paint you as, responsible for the failure if it fails. So you sure you want to send me to combat? And he's like, Yeah, I think I do. And and he sends him, basically makes up a story about him. He actually orders him arrested. The guy gets tased and he wakes up, the next day at this military base. And the narrative around him is that he's been caught trying to desert the army, that he's impersonating an officer, and he's actually a private and he should be put into combat in the front lines. And that's it. The guy, basically the corrupt general, shipped him off to the front to die. And that's very compelling, right? And he's in a lot of danger. So the main character's goal at that point, his desire, is to not go to combat. And it's set up very quickly. And everyone around him is colluding with the point of view that the general has put forward, which is this is a deserter, he deserves to go to combat, and he deserves to die. Like, we don't care. Yeah. And so the first part was define the normal world, and the second one is set a main character's goal. Because remember, we talked about the main character having that kind of desire, require setup, right? Where the require is something that's more important, more impactful for the story, but that their initial goal is something that they want. And it may not be the ultimate goal of the story. Well, in this case, it's very clear. He wants to avoid combat because he wants to stay alive. And so everything he's doing is to figure out how to not get into combat. And it fails, right? Because that desire thing, very often in those stories, they fail. So I really like that setup. It was a very clean setup.
Yeah. And that's it's because it doesn't, one thing that I hate the most is when you're watching something or you're reading something and it just screams exposition. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. And I've turned off stuff that just feels that way to me, or I've stopped reading things that feel like they're trying to be casual. They're trying to drop it in. They're trying not to, look like but it's exposition. So, very nicely done by that film.
Yeah. The next piece of it, so it's 10. Remember, it's 10 things. So 1 is define the normal world. 2 is set a main character's goal, which is the desire. And then the third one is to scaffold the risk and build tension. So here he's been set up with this concept of you're going to go to combat. So they start to show him how to use the equipment, but they barely show him, right? Because he's wearing the big power suit or whatever. He doesn't even know how to take the safety off of the gun. And then they immediately throw that character into combat. And so there's an amount of danger here that's escalating. Typically, though, in most stories I've seen, when they kind of scaffold the risk or build tension at that point, it's almost like a playful amount of danger. I think that's what makes Edge of Tomorrow so interesting, because it's not playful at that stage. It really is life or death. It becomes playful once you kind of hit that pivot point, which is when Tom Cruise, I hope I'm not blowing this for anybody. By the way, I'll just stop. If you haven't seen the movie and you don't want to hear what happens, pause, go watch the movie, do yourself a favor, and then come on back and listen to it from here.
Worth it. It's worth it.
It is. It's a great movie. So Tom Cruise dies around the end of Act 1, right? Close to the end of Act 1. He dies, but he dies in such a way that, as we learn later, the method of his dying and sort of I guess I can just say it. So he shoots this alien, this particular special alien that has this kind of time traveling power, and it basically infuses him with the ability to reset the day. And so he wakes up at the beginning of his day, which was at the base, being told that he was going to be put into combat. So it basically starts his day over. And that's the conceit for the rest of the movie, is that as long as he has this power, no matter what he does, he will always reset the day. And so that's when it becomes kind of a playful amount of danger as it kind of grows, because no matter what he does, he's always going to reset. So he starts to learn and grow and change, but there's no real risk because he's always kind of resetting. So that's the kind of scaffolding the risk, but having that playful amount of tension.
Yeah, it's really, really nicely set up. It's sort of, again, I think I'm not going to make comments. I don't want to ruin too much of the film for folks, but yes, very well done.
Yeah. So then the fourth thing that I've got is that the main character pivots to the real goal. So that's where you have, again, that kind of dichotomy of desire, require. At some point, they've got to pivot towards the thing that they really need. And I think if we're using that movie as kind of the skeleton that we're going to dissect here, I wonder if it's the fact that he was a coward is set up really hard up front. I wonder if it's the requirement is that he pivot to being heroic. and that's the arc for that character. He starts out being just, cowardly. And at the end of the movie, he is very heroic and really does risk it all.
Oh yeah, I definitely 100% agree.
So when the main character pivots to that real goal, that's when the story really starts to ratchet up in its sort of direction. Because I see, the time between the desire and the require, that kind of end of Act 1, beginning of Act 2, or really the beginning of Act 2, as that kind of playful, I think I've heard it referred to as like playtime in the garden. I can't remember, but some of these templates actually call out the fact that this is a playful amount of time in the story. It's almost like when you get a new toy and you're like, oh, can it do this? Can it do this? What can it do? And you're playing with it to see what it can do. And then at some point you decide what you want to do with it and you start doing that. So it feels like in the plot structure, it does kind of the same thing. So once we've got the main character kind of laser focused on what they require, they're going to start trying to figure out how to get it. And, people want to try to get it as quickly as they can. So they're going to try probably the most direct and obvious thing, and that is going to fail. And that's pretty much how it always works. If it were easy to accomplish, if it were quick to accomplish, you wouldn't have very much story. So when we put obstacles in front of our characters, they have to sort of faceplant based on that, or find out that if they're the rat in the maze, they come to that corridor that's basically just a wall and they've got to turn around and find another way. So they're running around and the danger is escalating. It's intensifying and failure becomes more and more possible, right? In fact, it really seems like failure is more and more likely as you continue. I think the Coen brothers do a really good job of this in, is it A Simple Plan? Is that a Coen brothers movie?
Simple Plan.
It's where Billy Bob Thornton
and Bill Paxton,
yes,
right?
Yeah, and they find a plane has crashed in the middle of the woods in winter, and it had a ton of stolen money in it, like a duffel bag full of several $1 million of stolen money, and they want to keep the money. And and I think it's three. There was a third person in the group, so these three guys collude to try to figure out how they can keep this money, and it tears them apart. That was a movie that for me was very hard to watch. I have trouble with movies or books that do not take their foot off the gas pedal, where it's like the tension, it's almost like they're stepping on my throat and they just won't stop. And I don't like that. It's really good story. It's very compelling. Oh, Bridget Fonda's in that too. She was really good in that, if I recall. But yeah, just, oh man, those are tough, where they just don't let up.
Yeah. Those, I sometimes tend to like those where they just sort of, I think that speaks to a little bit about that exposition for me. When I feel like we've gotten too much about that, when there's too much defining the normal world and it becomes too didactic for me, I love how the world is defined after we're already taking off, after we're already leaping. Like I sometimes enjoy that. And it's tough to do. I'm not going to be able to do it because I don't have the experience level yet, I think, to try and do something like that. I think I've definitely tried in the past. And maybe that's why I like writing microfiction, because you can kind of do that. You're just writing like one moment of, and a bigger piece. You know what I mean? Like It could be the very end of the piece. But yeah, those films, those books that put their foot on the gas. Yeah.
Interesting. It's interesting what you said about the normal world and how sometimes you can linger too much, to take too long defining it. That's a really good point. If you take, 3 or 4 chapters to sort of establish the setting, you're risking that the reader won't stick around for the 3 or 4 chapters before the cool thing starts happening. So, you've got to have, maybe that's why sometimes you're tempted to do a prologue on these longer works that has something really exciting that happens. And that way, when you start painting the normal world, at least you've sort of dangled that carrot and said, there's cool stuff, I promise, just hang in there. Yeah.
I do feel like, it's a difficult balance. A lot of times, and I think you've experienced this, because I've made you read so much of my work. Sometimes I wanna have as little exposition or cut to the chase so quickly that I forget that the reader doesn't know certain things. And so nowhere along the line of my story have I been able to define the normal world so that this piece that I've written is compelling? I've thought about it so much in my head that that I would keep forgetting that the reader hasn't been in my head and know what that normal world is. So yeah, it's a tough line.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, there's some writers who don't baby the, or don't coddle the reader, like George R.R. Martin. I've heard, and I haven't read any of George R.R. Martin because I'm really not interested in I love the shows, at least up until season 5. I really enjoyed Game of Thrones. Kind of stopped, after that. But no, my understanding is that he'll provide detail that the characters would know, but that the reader hasn't been exposed to yet, and just let it lie as if everybody in the room sort of understands what's going on. And it's left to the reader to infer what's happening based on context clues. And many people that I've spoken to appreciate that about his work because it's obvious that he's not spoon feeding the reader. The risk there, though, is that you alienate the reader by referencing things that are important that you just haven't bothered to tell the reader. And the reader might actually go, well, where is that? This is stupid. Right. I'm going to go read something else. So, as everything, it's going to work itself out in revision. I like the way you do things, Tim. I like the fact that you jump right in with the inciting event. You get as close to, it's good screenwriting technique. You get in as late as you can and you get out as early as you can. And I think you should continue to do that because in revision, when you go back and read through it, or when you get feedback from beta readers and they go, why is this? Oh, because you have to know X and Y. Oh, okay. That's good feedback for you because now you're like, all right, well, I need to plant X and Y early in the story. How do I do that elegantly? And so that's always something you can do in revision.
Yeah. And I think that comes from, that's a Vonneguttism. I'm pretty sure I got that from Vonnegut, who was like, always start the story as close to the end as possible. And so that kind of always stuck with me. And it's sort of like an exciting thing to think about.
Yeah, he's right. And by extension, you are also right.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about how the main character pivots to the real goal. I've talked a lot on this podcast about this is how you lose the time war, and that isn't. It was just that stuck out to me when you talked about that idea, because in that story you have two time traveling assassins who are enemies, but at some point they fall in love with each other so that the real goal becomes something very different. And I cannot say it enough. If you haven't read that book, you got to go read that book. It's fantastic. But yeah, that stuck out to me with, having your main characters sort of realize that there is a different goal, a true goal for what their purposes are.
Yeah, and it's something that to me was largely invisible. As a consumer of media, I wouldn't consider that the character's point of view has changed or that their sense of purpose is deepened, I guess is probably the right way to say it. But if you go back with that filter and you just sort of consume whatever media you'd like, you start to see it over and over and over again, that there is a structure below the surface that kind of holds the story together. And, if you're an iconoclast and you feel like, well, I don't need structure, I'm going to buck the system and do my own structure, and that's kind of what I'm doing here, you're still going to find that in order for the narrative to be pleasing and compelling, it does have to have some ups and downs. And in order for it to provide the kind of payoff that people want, that it's going to conform to a basic pattern, or a rule set. So, and that there's no problem with that. It's almost like, we have Wi-Fi technology and I want to use it because the world before Wi-Fi was different, and I don't want to go live in that world if Wi-Fi exists. So why am I going to push back on the fact that there's Wi-Fi? I don't know how that works. I'm going to make my own Wi-Fi. Really? Really? Are we doing that? Just use the Wi-Fi,
Just use it.
Just use it. Yeah. So, to me, it's almost like I'm recreating the wheel, but I'm doing it because I want to understand why the story shifts at these different points when it shifts so that I can replicate that. Because I just didn't, for whatever reason, I just don't have an emotional or an intellectual connection to any of these story templates. And I feel like, not cheating, but I feel like it's, color by numbers almost. And it doesn't make me happy. I want to be happy, damn it.
Yeah. And so then why are you writing?
And I'm not right now. So.
Oh, there you go.
That's a good point, though. Why am I writing? Oh, man. That's
You
a
know, and
whole
somebody,
podcast right there.
yeah, didn't I think I might have mentioned this that as an actor, I was talking to somebody and telling them, I've started, writing again, and I'm just submitting to magazines, and it's been a slog, and it's a lot of rejection. And they were like, "So you're a writer now too?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Did you not get enough rejection as an actor?" And I was like, "Maybe not."
I like it. You know, one of the ways that I was just thinking about the shape of the story that we were talking about earlier. One of the ways I commonly see stories is almost like a bell curve, where it has this rising action to the midpoint, and then you start falling off, or you have the one where it's like it's up and down, but then as the tension ratchets up towards the climax, it starts to climb and climb and climb. But most of the stories are like right side up. It's like a camel hump. And I like to think of the stories upside down. I like to think of them as kind of a trough. So like if you have the Marianas Trench in the sea, you have this huge cliffside that you kind of fall off of into the deep, deep ocean, and you've got to try to get your way out of the ocean. So I don't know, maybe it's just the shape of the story, but the way I'm thinking of this is almost like a big upside down parabola, like a big U. And the midpoint of the story, everybody agrees there's a midpoint, and the midpoint for me is when the main character is so committed to the story that they can't extricate themselves from it. Because if you look back at various stories, most of the time, if people just make different decisions, they can actually pull themselves out of that narrative. If a main character decided between the end of Act 1 and the midpoint in Act 2, if we're using the 3-act structure, like that, in that section of the story, if they just said, fuck it, I'm out, they could pull themselves out of the story. Like, they could not make the thing that they're trying to do be important anymore, and they'll just go do something else.
Yeah.
And that's where I would always go, well, why don't they just do that? Because I was trying to write them away from conflict anyway. And my characters were always looking for the off ramp, and they're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go over here and be nice. Like, wait, what are you doing? Why do you want to do that? That's so boring. Yeah.
Luke Skywalker's like, no. I'm stealing a TIE fighter. Forget it. I'm going back home.
Yeah.
No.
Well, imagine if Luke, that's a great example. So Luke sees his aunt and his uncle burned to a crisp, and that redoubles, or he doubles down on that, and, goes to the Millennium Falcon and continues the adventure. But if he got so freaked out by that and said, oh my God, I don't want to die, I don't want the Imperial forces to find me and kill me, I'm going to go into hiding, and then the story's over. Right? There's no more story.
Or maybe, he sees Uncle Ben and Aunt Beru, and then he just becomes, his addiction problems surface. He becomes a drunk at Mos Eisley, and then we have a nice short story about him being a bartender who coulda, woulda, shoulda at the Mos Eisley Cantina.
That's definitely a different story.
A very bad one.
Maybe so, yeah. But the midpoint is that the only way out is through. And so I struggle with how to create a circumstance where a main character is so committed to an activity that they will stick through it even though it's getting worse and there's no clear way to get out of it. So that to me is challenging. I hope to be able to crack that nut at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a difficult, it's the resolution. It's like, oh, okay, now I have to get through this. Yeah, it's going to, every time you bring up a point about this, I'm sort of like with my loosey-goosey idea about this novel that I'm trying to start putting together. I'm like, oh man, what's going to be the thing there? So yeah, more thinking while lawn mowing. You got a lot of work to do, Blur.
Yeah. Well, that's the midpoint, so we still have like half the thing to go, but there's only 4 sections, because to me, as the main character becomes more focused on what they want, then all of the scenes just feed that one thing, and I think it becomes a lot easier to plot from that point forward. To me, the hard part is, how do I paint the natural world, the normal world, in a very succinct footprint so that people can get a sense of what's real now, and then how do I pivot in a way that's interesting so that people get a sense of what's changed, and then how do I give the main character something that they think is important but really isn't to go chase, and then they either succeed or fail, but they recognize that there's something more important to go chase. So now they're going to go chase that. And then they get to that point in the midpoint where it's like, I'm chasing this thing no matter what, damn it. We're on, right? So like that whole first half of the story seems like it's a lot of threads that need to be kind of woven together. But from the midpoint on, it's much more laser focused on, we know what the goal is, and by God, we're going to do it. But from that midpoint forward, again, on that power index, they still are sliding deeper into the trough. Like they don't have the power to do what they want. They're going to try and fail. I've seen one, I can't remember which template it is, but one of them calls it the Dark Night of the Soul. It might be the Save the Cat one. But it's this whole idea that, that the main character's tested and in some cases traumatized, but like things just really look bleak. Like they just get bad, and to the point where you're not sure how the hell they're going to get out of this one. Like they've gotten themselves in so much trouble. I don't see a way out. And that's that's where we want our readers to be, is to worry about the character because they care, and to go, how the hell are they going to get out of this one?
Yes, exactly. And that's, and that's something that I've always avoided. That's why longer pieces for me are a little bit intimidating, because for me, I feel like the character kind of knows who they are. They feel like they've got a thing going on. But this moment, this Dark Night of the Soul, is what exposes who they really are, what their real motivations are. Why are they doing this? What is the secret that they're trying to reveal to themselves that can only be seen through this, this new goal of theirs that they're committed to?
Yeah, I've been thinking of it as the risk of destruction or risk of oblivion, and that's sort of what the problem is. I have an example from my own personal life that's really stupid, but I'm going to share it with you now. I used to have a really crappy car called Christine, named after the Stephen King book, but it was this giant tank, and this is back in, I guess, 88, I think. So it was a 1982 Buick Park Avenue. It got 12 miles to the gallon. And it was just a tank. And there was this particular piece of road near the Superdome. It was on the interstate in New Orleans, near the Superdome. And it was this really tight curve, like this unnaturally tight curve on an interstate. And they've since removed it. That it doesn't exist anymore. But back in the day, it was there. And I remember as a 15, 16-year-old dumbass, I'm like, I'm going to floor it towards that curve, and then I'm going to take that curve and see if I can take it, right? Because that's what you do when you're a dumbass. So I did. I would floor it, and fortunately for me, it was up an incline. So, it was hoofing and puffing trying to get up this incline.
To get up there, yeah.
Yeah, and so I would hit that curve at about 70, 73 miles an hour. And I could take it, and it was fine. And then a heavy car, it's gonna sit down. So I got to the point where I would do that so frequently that it was boring, because the car was and I got better as a driver, and the car was well suited to not leave its wheels. So I'm just like, whatever. So then I got a new car. I got an Acura. You know where this is going. I got an Acura Integra. It was red. It was a beautiful car.
Red even.
Yeah,
okay.
Red.
Yeah. All right. Red. You're really hitting these buttons.
Oh yeah. It was the please pull me over red was the car color. And it was lighter weight, and it had a better engine, and I didn't have any context or clue that this would be an issue. So the first time, and I used to call it the death curve, right? Because I'm an asshole. So I come up on the death curve and I'm like, oh, I've got this new car. Let me see if I can take it. So I slam down the gas, and here we go. And it dawns on me a fraction of a second too late. You've gotten yourself in a problem here, buddy. Because I look down and I'm going about 90, maybe 92. And I have to take this curve. So I take the curve, and I'm pretty sure I took my foot off the gas when I took the curve. Or else I don't think we'd be talking today. And I felt it was a left-hand turn, and I felt two of my wheels come up off the ground. And I didn't do a Dukes of Hazzard thing, where it's on its side. But I was definitely only on two wheels for a moment or a second. And then, it came down, and I came out of the death curve, and it looked the same way that any character would be like, this sort of what have I done? That was really stupid. I never did it again, because again, he can be taught. But it was just one of those things where it's things look bleak and you have no idea how you're going to get out of this one. when I think of that moment in the story, I think of me, committing to this stupid endeavor and really putting myself in danger. So that's the risk of destruction. And it's really interesting to me to think about main characters in crisis. Let's assume it's a person who hasn't done something stupid and put themselves in a bad spot, but maybe they have forces that are working against them that are just more powerful than they are. And those more powerful forces are putting them in this bad spot, further and further down into the hole until they really are at a point where they don't know how to get out of this one. And that's when we as the writers and they as characters discover the key, right? We found the key. So the plan emerges to sort of get out of the hole. There is hope. It's almost like an injection of hope at that point in the story, because what seemed bleak and unconquerable, now there's a chance. So you got a chance. And then the rest of the story is kind of clawing your way out of that pit, on that one chance and just trying to execute that one thing that'll get you out of the story.
Yeah, the key. I get it. I know that part where the character's in the most desperate place. It's usually where some sort of drug kingpin places the A-team in a shed for them to be killed at a later time. But thankfully, they find the key in an old beat-up pickup truck, a lot of steel plating, and things that they could kind of turn into some sort of projectile-throwing weapon to get out of these hijinks. Oh, I remember the A-team did that very well.
I guess if we're looking at the Edge of Tomorrow that we were talking about earlier, the key that they found is when they discovered not only how he was able to reset the day, but also how to stop the enemy from being able to reset the day. And they hatched the plan to attack that location that would allow them to remove that capability. And so that, and the entire story just, funnels and tunnels down on that one concept, and everything about the story is now in service of that activity, which is the final showdown or the payoff. So that's the ninth of the 10 things is really the payoff. So you've got the fight with the big bad, where Harry and Voldemort are fighting in the last Harry Potter movie, or any of those things. Again, because they exist in all these stories doesn't mean they're bad. It means that that's just the way the story works. And that payoff is something the audience has been waiting for. So, I mean, if you are in a position where you are thinking about subverting that expectation, probably don't. Yeah, don't.
That is something we also had drilled into us during narrative improv classes, was that if you make a promise to the audience, that audience needs to see it come back and paid off in the end. You have to be aware of that stuff when you do that in your own writing. For a long time, I didn't. If you're making certain promises, like a character says that they're going to do this, then at some point in the story, they kind of have to do that. Sometimes those are very, very, very satisfying payoffs. They don't have to, necessarily be a huge part of the final showdown or the payoff, or actually they kind of do, but there can be smaller ones throughout that are just as satisfying. That's huge. I love that part of good storytelling. The final showdown, the payoff.
Yeah, for sure. And then once that's done, the last one, the 10th one, is the wrap-up, which, in Freytag's pyramid is the denouement. There's plenty of those. But it's basically, to me, I think it's a way of defining what the new normal world looks like. The normal world was a thing. It tilted because the main character went on this journey. And at the end of it, the normal world's probably a little different. And any subplots that you've got, you want to wrap those up too. Don't leave things unresolved, if you can avoid it.
Unless you're looking at sequels.
Oh, I guess. I guess. Yeah.
No, I have such a hard time writing a piece of longer fiction. I can't even think about why don't I put myself through a special hell?
Yeah, book one of my exactly. Book one of my trilogy. I'm like, why do you hate yourself?
Look, I get it. Some of you are professors, some of you teach writing, some of you are fucking rich kids, and some of you have all that stuff. I got a 40-hour job. I can't sit here being like, you know what I'd really like to do? This character that I had showcased in chapter 2 deserves their own trilogy arc. It's like, what? You shut up.
Yeah, I know.
Also, I wish I was you.
Exactly. Well, so that's the 10 steps. And again, I think if you compare that to any of the existing models, you'll see great alignment with many of them. And I'm not trying to sell you on using this at all, really. I'm just sort of showcasing my own inadequacy in being able to adopt an existing model that works just fine. And like, I can't do that. I have to make up my own. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
But this has really helped, because in sort of breaking down how I understand other stories to do this, I feel like I've chunked this in a way that allows me to tackle just one piece at a time. Maybe that's it. Like when you look at Freytag's Pyramid or any of these in total, there's so much up and down and movement around and things that have to happen. There's so many non-negotiables in there that I get kind of frightened by it, because I'm like, oh, what if I'm not able to find something compelling there? What if I can't come up with a suitable midpoint? What if I can't do this? And then my default is to just not do it. The easiest thing in the world is to not write,
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to kind of con myself into, well, just take a little bit at a time. Just define the normal world. Just set a desire for the main character. Just build the tension a little bit. Just have them pivot to the require. Like, just build the danger. So like every little step is kind of a step closer to that final goal.
Yeah. And I think that, this is a really nice structure to start from. And if you want to try and move some of these pieces around or think that you can, what, I could probably blend this or that together, I think that would be very interesting. But for me, who's been so opposed, like I really put myself in a bad position very early on in my life, in my 20s, where I was like, I should know this stuff inherently because I have a writing degree. I consume a lot of media, whether it's books, short stories, film, or television. I should have this. And so I'm very happy to have these 10 points that you kind of put together, because number one, I still love the process of just taking off. I'm just going to write. Remember, I don't know if you remember Commander Mark. Draw 30 minutes a day, and soon you'll be a great drawer. If you know that reference, please comment, DM me, DM us here. But I love taking off and drawing, and I think that what ended up happening from in my 20s and my 30s, even touching into my 40s, is that I didn't realize that if I was getting into trouble, when I got into trouble with a story, I was like, well, I'm stuck. I guess that's it. I'm gone. Now I'm very excited to start on a longer piece, to start something that we've been talking about, to get into this novel business. But if I come into a situation, use these also as a reference. Wait a minute, let me ask some questions about this. Where am I going? Do I have this part of the 10 pieces? Do I, what's the end, when does my character pivoting to the real goal? Like, how am I building the danger? So I'm very excited to use these as a reference point to both look at in the beginning, look at in the middle when I'm like, I'm never going to be a good writer. And then look at the end to say, okay, let's see if I've touched on all these to make sure it's a compelling piece.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, actually. I mean, I'm going to include this in the show notes. I want the 10 steps, front and center for folks who feel like they want to compare that to the process that they're using. And if they get any value from it, great. But for me, the kind of descriptors underneath those titles helps center me on what is this section of the story trying to accomplish. And I don't feel so much pressure to conceive of the whole story in total, start to finish, in this perfect, rising and falling action and whatnot. Notice we haven't used rising and falling action at all.
Oh, yeah, that's right. No.
We haven't talked about it at all because it never made any sense to me. Like, what is rising action? I mean, I guess what they're saying is that the amount of tension is increasing. Okay, well, I said it that way. Great. The falling action? The fuck is falling action? Like, is that me trying to pull the ripcord as I fell out of the airplane, hoping that I have a parachute on? That's falling action. No, those terms don't make sense to me. And I just want something that's easy to consume, that makes sense to me, that kind of breaks it into manageable chunks. And so that's why I've got 10 pieces. And the more I think about it, the more I like the whole trench analogy, kind of if you've got a scuba diver going down into the trench and then coming back up, because the further down into the trench you get, the less light there is. You just can't see, and there's
Yeah.
just more and more risk and danger, and you want to get out of it. So this is just a way to get into a trench and get out of it.